The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a mile, its ceiling lost in darkness above where ancient lights flickered like dying stars. And 12 species had gathered here today to witness something that happened only once every 1,000 cycles. The admission of a new species into their ranks. High Arbiter Thesan of the Morvani stood at the central platform, her insectoid body covered in ceremonial gold plates that clicked softly whenever she moved, and her compound eyes reflected the faces of ambassadors from worlds scattered across the galaxy today. They would welcome the Vrakthi Dominion. The Vrakthi delegation entered through the main gates, with all the pride of conquerors, their reptilian bodies standing nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shimmered between green and black depending on the light. And their leader walked at the front with his head held high. His name was Krovith, and he had never bowed to anyone in his entire life. "Welcome, Ambassador Krovith," Thesan said, her voice carrying across the hall through ancient speakers embedded in the walls. "The Galactic Concord recognizes the Vrakthi Dominion as a spacefaring civilization worthy of joining our assembly." Krovith, as yellow eyes scanned the gathered species with barely hidden contempt. He saw the jellyfish-like Thesarans floating in their water tanks, the crystalline Mordax, who communicated through vibrations, the tall and slender Elathi, whose skin changed colors with their emotions, all of them weak, all of them soft, all of them hiding behind treaties and trade agreements instead of taking what they wanted through strength. "We accept your recognition," Krovith replied, his voice a deep rumble that echoed off the walls. "The Vrakthi Dominion looks forward to expanding our influence among the stars." Thesan gestured with one of her 4 arms, and a holographic map burst into existence above the platform, showing the entire galaxy in brilliant detail with different colors marking the territories of each species. "This map shows all claimed territories," Thesan explained. "The blue regions belong to the Morvani Collective, the green to the Thesaran Depths, the purple to the Elathi Federation, and so on. You will notice that most of the galaxy has been divided among the elder species." Krovith studied the map with growing interest, his tactical mind already identifying weak points and potential expansion routes. But then his eyes fell upon something that made him pause. An entire spiral arm of the galaxy was marked in red. "What is that region?" he demanded, pointing with one clawed finger. "It appears to contain hundreds of habitable worlds and countless resources, yet it bears no species name. Is it unclaimed?" The hall went silent. Thesan's compound eyes seemed to darken, and several ambassadors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Elathi representative's skin turned a pale shade of gray that Krovith did not recognize. "That territory," Thesan said slowly, "belongs to the humans." Krovith waited for more information, but when none came, he let out a bark of laughter that echoed through the hall. "Humans?" he repeated. "We have intercepted their broadcasts. We have studied their transmissions. They are small creatures with soft skin and short lifespans who spend most of their time fighting among themselves over trivial matters. Surely you do not expect the Vrakthi to fear such beings." "I expect you to listen," Thesan replied, and there was something in her voice that made even Krovith pause, something ancient and heavy, like the weight of 1,000 warnings given and ignored. "The Vrakthi fear nothing," Krovith declared. But he noticed that none of the other ambassadors met his eyes. Thesan moved closer to the holographic map and zoomed in on a region of space that appeared completely empty. "Do you see this sector?" she asked. 300 cycles ago, it was home to the Harawak Empire, a civilization of warriors who made your people look like hatchlings playing with sticks. They had conquered 40 worlds and enslaved dozens of species, and they believed themselves to be the greatest power in the galaxy. "I have never heard of the Harawak," Krovith said. "No one has," Thesan replied, "because they no longer exist." She let that statement hang in the air before continuing. The Harawak made a mistake. They attacked a human colony world and killed several thousand civilians. They expected retaliation, perhaps a war, perhaps negotiations. What they got was something else entirely. What happened to them? The humans hunted them, Thiessen said simply. Not in a way you might expect. There was no great fleet battle, no invasion of their homeworld, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, the humans simply followed them. Followed them? Krovith's confusion was evident in his voice. You must understand something about humans, Thiessen continued. They evolved on a death world, a planet where everything wanted to kill them, where the weather itself was deadly, where predators lurked in every shadow. But they survived, and do you know how? Krovith shook his head. They did not survive by being the fastest or the strongest. They survived through what they call persistence predation. When humans hunted on their homeworld, they did not chase their prey and catch it in a sprint. Instead, they followed it at a walking pace, never stopping, never resting, tracking it across miles and days until the prey simply collapsed from exhaustion. That is impossible, Krovith scoffed. No creature can maintain pursuit for that long. Humans can, Thiessen replied. And this instinct did not disappear when they reached the stars when the Harawak attacked them. The humans did not seek a quick victory. They sought a complete one. She pulled up more images on the holographic display. Empty worlds, abandoned stations, ghost ships drifting through the void. For 200 cycles, the humans hunted the Harawak across the galaxy. Every time the Harawak thought they had escaped, human ships would appear on their sensors. Every time they found a new home, human scouts would arrive within a decade. Every time they tried to rebuild, human agents would sabotage their efforts. This cannot be true, Krovith said. But his voice had lost some of its confidence. The Harawak fled to the edges of known space. The humans followed. They fled to uncharted systems. The humans mapped them. They fled to other galaxies, and the humans built ships that could make the journey. Thiessen turned to face Krovith directly, her compound eyes boring into his. You may win the first battle against humans, Ambassador. You may win the second and the third. You may destroy their fleets and burn their worlds, but you will never defeat them, because humans do not know how to give up. They will hunt you for generations, if they must. They will pass the mission from parent to child to grandchild. They will follow you across time and space until one of two things happens. Either you return what you took from them, or your species ceases to exist. We do not go to war with humans, she concluded, not because we cannot defeat them, but because victory against them is impossible. Krovith stood in silence for a long moment, his mind processing everything he had heard. But then his pride reasserted itself. He had led the Vrakthi to countless victories, had never retreated from any enemy, had built an empire through strength and cunning. Your warnings are noted, he said finally. But the Vrakthi are not the Harawak. We do not flee, we do not hide, and we do not fear soft-skinned creatures who bleed so easily. Thiessen regarded him with something that might have been pity. Then I hope you never give them a reason to hunt you. Ambassador, for your sake and for the sake of your entire species. Krovith turned and strode out of the hall with his delegation following behind him. And as the great doors closed, he was already planning his empire's expansion into the Red Territory. On the map, he would show these ancient species what the Vrakthi were capable of. He would show them that humans were nothing to fear. He had no idea how wrong he was. 3 cycles passed after the warning, and Krovith had risen through the ranks of the Vrakthi Dominion to become fleet commander, a position earned through cunning political moves and a willingness to do whatever was necessary to achieve victory. His fleet of 30 warships now patrolled the borders of Vrakthi space, searching for opportunities to expand their territory. And it was during one of these patrols that his sensor officer detected something interesting. Commander, the officer reported, We have found a small colony on the fourth planet of this system. Preliminary scans indicate it is a mining operation with approximately 12,000 inhabitants. Kroveth leaned forward in his command chair, his yellow eyes gleaming with interest. What species? Human, Commander. A slow smile spread across Kroveth's face, revealing rows of sharp teeth that had torn through the flesh of many enemies. The planet was called Elysium 7 by its inhabitants. A world rich in rare minerals the humans used to build their starship engines. And the colony had been established only 15 years ago by families seeking a quiet life far from the crowded cities of Earth. There were miners who worked the deep shafts carved into the mountains, scientists who studied the strange creatures that lived in the purple forests, teachers who educated children in small schools built from local stone, and retired military officers who had come here to watch their grandchildren grow up in peace. One of these retired officers was Commander Lydia Chan, a woman of 62 years who had served 30 years in the Earth Naval Forces before deciding she had seen enough war for one lifetime. She lived in a small house on the edge of the main settlement with her daughter, her son-in-law, and her 2 grandchildren, a boy of 8 named Marcus and a girl of 5 named Sarah, and she spent her days teaching them about the stars and telling them stories of her adventures on the morning that changed everything. Lydia was preparing breakfast while her grandchildren played in the garden outside. She heard the sound. First the deep rumbling that made the windows rattle and the dishes shake on their shelves, and she looked up to see the sky filling with dark shapes, warships, dozens of them. Everyone get to the shelter now, she shouted, her military training taking over instantly as she grabbed the children and pulled them toward the underground bunkers she had insisted on building when they first arrived, but they never made it. The first plasma bombardment struck the settlement center, vaporizing hundreds of people in an instant. The second hit the power station, plunging the colony into darkness. The third and fourth and fifth turned homes and schools and hospitals into craters of molten glass. Lydia shielded her grandchildren with her body as explosions rocked the ground around them. And when the bombardment finally stopped, she looked up to see alien soldiers descending from the sky on personal flight units. The Rakthi had come. What followed was not a battle but a slaughter. The colonists had no military weapons, no defense systems, no way to fight back against an enemy that had been conquering worlds for centuries. But they tried. Miners used their drilling equipment as weapons, charging at Rakthi soldiers and buying time for others to escape. Scientists rigged their laboratory equipment to explode, taking down enemy troops at the cost of their own lives. Teachers stood in front of their students and refused to move until they were cut down. Where they stood, Lydia found an old hunting rifle in a destroyed home and used it to kill 3 Rakthi soldiers. Before they finally cornered her, she would have kept fighting until they killed her. But then she saw them dragging her grandchildren toward a transport ship, and she dropped her weapon. "Take me instead," she begged. "Please, they are just children." The Rakthi soldier who held her laughed. "We take all of you," he said. "Commander Kroveth wants prisoners. He wants to show the galaxy that humans are nothing but prey." By the time the attack was over, the colony of Elysium 7 had been reduced to smoking ruins. Of the 12,000 inhabitants, more than 11,000 were dead, and the remaining 700 were being loaded onto transport ships as slaves. Lydia was pushed and shoved into a holding cell with dozens of other survivors, her hands bound behind her back and her face covered in blood from a wound on her forehead. She could hear children crying somewhere in the ship, and she prayed that her grandchildren were among them, prayed that they were still alive. The transport ship rose into the sky, and through a small window, Lydia watched her home burn beneath her. Then the door to the holding cell opened, and a massive Rakthi entered, larger than the others. with golden rings through his nostrils and ceremonial scars across his face that marked him as a leader. It was Kroveth himself. He walked among the prisoners, examining them like a farmer examining livestock, and when he reached Lydia, he stopped. "You fought well for a human," he said, his voice filled with amusement. "My soldiers tell me you killed 3 of them before you surrendered. That is impressive for such a weak creature." Lydia looked up at him. "And despite everything, despite the death of her home, despite the chains on her wrists, despite the blood running down her face, she smiled. "You have made a mistake," she said quietly. Kroveth tilted his head, intrigued by her response. "And what mistake is that, little human?" "Not attacking us," Lydia replied. "Taking prisoners. If you had simply destroyed the colony and left, perhaps humanity would have mourned and moved on. But you took our people, you made us slaves, and now they will have to find you." "They?" Kroveth laughed. "Your pathetic fleet, your primitive weapons. Do you think we fear anything your species can send against us?" "You should," Lydia said. "You were warned. Commander, the Galactic Concord told you what happens when humans are given a reason to hunt. They told you about the Harawak, about how we followed them across the galaxy until nothing remained of their civilization. And now you have given us that reason. We have given you nothing but chains," Kroveth growled, his amusement fading. "You have given us a promise to keep," Lydia corrected him. "We will come for our people, not tomorrow, not next year, maybe not even in my lifetime. But we will come, and we will not stop until every single one of us is returned, living or dead." Kroveth struck her across the face with the back of his hand, sending her crashing to the floor. Blood poured from her split lip, but when she looked up at him again, she was still smiling. "You will die in chains, human," he snarled. "You will spend the rest of your miserable life as a slave, and no one will come for you. Then I will die knowing that someone is on their way," Lydia replied. "And you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when they will arrive." Kroveth turned and stormed out of the cell, the door slamming shut behind him. But as he walked back to his command deck, he could not shake the feeling that those dark human eyes were still watching him, still smiling, still certain of something that he could not understand across the galaxy. An emergency beacon activated. Its signal traveled through space at faster than light speeds, carrying a simple message to every human station, ship, and colony within range. The message contained the coordinates of Elysium 7, a recording of the attack, and the names of every single prisoner who had been taken within hours. The message reached Earth within days. Everyone knew what had happened, and within weeks, the hunt began. The Vrakthi Dominion expected many things after their attack on Elysium 7. They expected outrage and threats, demands for the return of prisoners, perhaps even a hasty military strike that they could crush with their superior firepower. What they got instead was silence. For 3 months after the attack, humanity said nothing. There were no declarations of war, no angry broadcasts, no diplomatic protests filed with the Galactic Concord. The human government simply acknowledged what had happened and went quiet. Kroveth found this silence deeply unsettling, though he would never admit it to his subordinates. Perhaps they are afraid, his second-in-command suggested during one strategy meeting. Perhaps they have realized that challenging the Vrakthi would mean their destruction. Perhaps, Kroveth agreed, but he remembered the look in that old woman's eyes, the certainty in her voice when she said they would come, and he could not convince himself that fear was the answer. He was right to be worried. While the Vrakthi celebrated their victory and displayed their human slaves as trophies of conquest, humanity was doing something far more dangerous than preparing for war. They were preparing for a hunting, a secure facility deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon. Admiral James Morrison stood before a room of intelligence officers, military strategists, and scientists. And on the screen behind him was everything humanity had learned about the Vrakthi. Dominion in the past 3 months. This is what we know, he said, advancing through slides that showed detailed maps, biological data, and economic analyses. The Vrakthy reproduce slowly. Each clutch of eggs takes 40 years to mature, and a female Vrakthy can only produce 2 clutches in her lifetime. This means their population grows at a rate of approximately 1% per generation. He moved to the next slide. Their entire civilization depends on a single food source, a fungal crop called Vethsha that requires very specific atmospheric conditions to grow. Without it, they cannot survive. There are currently 17 agricultural worlds that produce this crop. Next slide. Their military is powerful, but spread thin across their empire. They rely on intimidation rather than occupation, conquering worlds and then leaving small garrisons to maintain control. This makes them vulnerable to asymmetric warfare. Next slide. And finally, Commander Krovith has been promoted to Supreme Admiral for his victory at Elysium 7. He's now the highest-ranking military officer in the Vrakthy Dominion, which means he's our primary target. Admiral Morrison turned to face the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not going to fight a war with the Vrakthy wars can be won or lost, and we cannot afford to lose. Instead, we are going to hunt them, and hunts only end one way. The plan that emerged from that meeting was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It did not rely on fleets or armies or weapons of mass destruction. It relied on patience, intelligence, and the one advantage humans had over every other species in the known universe. They simply would not stop. The first strike came 6 months after Elysium 7, and it came not from a warship, but from a merchant vessel. A human trading ship requested permission to dock at a Vrakthy border station, claiming to carry rare goods from a distant system. The Vrakthy commander of the station was amused by this. A human trader visiting Vrakthy space so soon after the attack seemed almost like a joke. He granted permission. The ship docked. Its cargo was inspected and found to contain exactly what was listed on the manifest. And the human crew conducted their business and left without incident. 3 weeks later, every Vrakthy on the station was dead. The cause was a biological agent, a modified virus that was completely harmless to most species, but lethal to the fungal spores that Vrakthy carried in their respiratory systems. Without these spores, the Vrakthy could not digest their food, and they slowly starved to death. Even while eating, no human ship was ever seen near the station again across the Dominion. Panic began to spread as reports came in of similar incidents. Agricultural worlds found their Vethsha crops dying from unknown diseases. Military stations lost communication and were found filled with corpses. Supply lines were disrupted by accidents that seemed too convenient to be coincidence, and through it all, humans maintained their silence. They made no claims, issued no threats, took no credit for what was happening. Krovith ordered his intelligence officers to find proof of human involvement, but there was nothing to find. The biological agents broke down within hours of release. The saboteurs never left traces, and the few witnesses who survived could only report seeing ordinary traders, scientists, or travelers who had legitimate reasons to be where they were. "They are ghosts," one officer reported. "We cannot fight what we cannot see." But the worst part was not the attacks themselves. It was the waiting between them. Weeks would pass without incident, and the Vrakthy would begin to relax, to believe that the humans had given up. Then another station would go dark. Another world would lose its crops. Another supply convoy would vanish into the void. The uncertainty was maddening. Meanwhile, on a prison world deep within Vrakthy space, Lydia Chun and the other survivors of Elysium 7 worked in the mines, alongside slaves from a dozen other species. The work was brutal, and the guards were cruel. But Lydia refused to let her people lose hope. "They are coming," she whispered to them in the darkness of their barracks. "I do not know when, but they are coming. We just have to survive until they get here. Some of the younger prisoners doubted her. They had seen the power of the Vrakthi fleet, the vastness of their empire, and they could not imagine how humanity could possibly defeat such an enemy. But Lydia had been a naval officer for 30 years, and she understood something that the Vrakthi did not. We do not need to defeat them, she explained. We just need to outlast them. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done. Our ancestors chased animals across the African savanna until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. And now our children will chase the Vrakthi across the galaxy until the same thing happens. But that could take decades. One young man protested. We could all be dead by then. Yes, Lydia agreed. We might be, but our people will still come. Not because we are alive, but because they promised they would. And humans keep their promises. Back on Earth, the first generation of hunters was being trained. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were engineers, biologists, linguists, and economists who had volunteered for missions that might last their entire lifetimes. They learned to speak the Vrakthi language, to blend in with other species, to identify weaknesses in enemy systems. That would not be exploited for years or even decades, Admiral. Morrison called them the long walk, a reference to the ancient hunting technique that had made humans the most successful predators on their homeworld. Your mission is simple, he told each graduating class. Find them, follow them, and never let them rest. You may not live to see the end of this hunt, but your children will continue it, and their children after them. We do not stop, we do not forget, and we do not forgive, not until every single one of our people is returned to us. The graduates dispersed across the galaxy, taking positions on neutral stations, establishing false identities, building networks of informants and allies who would watch and wait and report, and slowly, inevitably, the noose began to tighten around the Vrakthi Dominion. Krovith could feel it, a pressure that never eased, an enemy that never showed itself, a fear that crept into his dreams and whispered that no matter where he ran, no matter where he hid, they would find him. He had conquered countless worlds and defeated countless enemies, but he had never faced anything like this. He had never been hunted. The war, if it could be called a war, lasted 47 years in that time. Krovith watched everything he had built crumble like sandcastles before the tide. Not through conquest, not through military defeat, but through something far worse, exhaustion. First decade was the hardest for the Vrakthi to understand. They kept waiting for the human fleet to appear, for the grand battle that would decide the fate of both civilizations, but it never came. Instead, there were only the endless small attacks, the constant pressure, the slow bleeding of resources and morale that never seemed to stop by the 15th year. The Vrakthi Dominion had abandoned their outermost colonies. They simply could not protect them anymore. Not when human agents seemed to be everywhere. Not when every supply shipment might be sabotaged. Not when every new recruit might be a spy. We will consolidate our forces, Krovith declared. We will draw back to our core worlds where we can defend ourselves properly. But the humans followed within 5 years of the consolidation. Attacks began occurring on worlds that had never seen a human face. Agricultural production dropped by 30%, then 40%, then 50%. Starvation spread through the outer territories like a plague. The Galactic Concord watched in horrified fascination. How are they doing this? The Elathi ambassador asked during an emergency session. We see no human fleets, no invasion forces, no military movements of any kind, yet the Vrakthi are being destroyed. High Arbiter Thyssen of the Morvani simply shook her head. They are being hunted, she said. I warned them what that meant. By the 20th year, Krovith had been stripped of his title as Supreme Admiral. The Vrakthi leadership blamed him for the disaster, even though everyone knew that no one could have stopped what was happening, was reduced to commanding a single fleet of refugee ships. fleeing from system to system in a desperate search for safety. But there was no safety. Every time the refugees found a habitable world and began to build a new home, human scouts would appear within a decade. They never attacked immediately. They simply watched, mapping the new colony, cataloging its defenses, and reporting back to some distant command that seemed to have infinite patience. Then the sabotage would begin again by the 30th year. The Vrakthi had fled to the edges of known space, to systems so remote that they did not appear on any galactic map. They found a cluster of habitable worlds in a region that no other species had ever visited. And for 5 years, they dared to hope that they had finally escaped on the 6th year. A human probe drifted through their system. Kroveth stared at the images captured by his sensors, a small metallic object covered in human writing, tumbling slowly through the void, and for the first time in his long life, he felt true despair. How? He whispered. How did they find us? They never stopped looking, his aide replied. For 30 years, they have been sending probes to every corner of the galaxy, searching for any sign of our passage. They knew we would run, and they prepared for it. We cannot keep running forever, Kroveth said. No, his aide agreed. We cannot. Back on the prison world, Lydia Chun had become a legend among the slaves. She was 90 years old now, her body broken by decades of hard labor, but her spirit remained unbroken. She still whispered words of hope in the darkness, still promised that rescue was coming, still believed with absolute certainty that humanity had not forgotten. The most of the original Elysium 7 survivors had died, some from the work, some from disease, some from the casual cruelty of their captors. But Lydia refused to give up. Her granddaughter, Sarah, had grown into a woman, had married another prisoner, had given birth to 2 children who had never known freedom. When Lydia looked at these children, she saw the future she was fighting for. Grandmother, Sarah said one night, sitting beside Lydia's sleeping mat, do you truly believe they are still coming after all this time? Lydia reached out and took her granddaughter's hand. I do not believe it, she said. I know it. The same way I know the sun will rise tomorrow. The same way I know that water flows downhill. Humans do not abandon their own. Sarah, not ever. Not for any reason. But 40 years, Sarah whispered. That is longer than I have been alive, and they will hunt for another 40 if they must, Lydia replied. And another 40 after that. Do you know what they call this back home? They call it the long walk, after the way our ancestors used to hunt. We would follow an animal for days, never stopping, never resting, until it collapsed from exhaustion. That is what they are doing to the Vrakthi. They are following them, and they will not stop until this is finished. Sarah squeezed her grandmother's hand. I wish Marcus could have seen this, she said, speaking of her brother who had died in the mines 15 years ago. He is watching, Lydia said. They all are. Every soul we have lost in this place is watching and waiting for the day when we walk out of here as free people. That night, Lydia Chun died in her sleep. She was 94 years old, and she had spent 32 of those years as a slave. She never saw the rescue she had promised, never felt the sun on her face as a free woman, never held her great-grandchildren in a world without chains. But her last words, recorded by Sarah and passed along through secret channels until they reached Earth 18 months later, were these: tell them to keep coming. The message was received by Captain Yuki Chun, commander of the hunting fleet's flagship. Yuki was the daughter of Marcus Chun, Lydia's grandson, who had been only 8 years old when Elysium 7 fell. He had grown up on Earth with the knowledge that his grandmother and sister were slaves somewhere among the stars, and he had dedicated his life to finding them. He never did. Marcus died in a shuttle accident at the age of 43, leaving behind a daughter who inherited his mission along with his grandmother's. Fire now, Yuki stood on the bridge of the U.S. Persistence, reading the words of a woman she had never met, but had spent her entire life fighting. 4. Tell them to keep coming, she whispered then. She turned to her crew. We have received confirmation that the Vrakthi refugee fleet has fled through an unstable wormhole to a distant galaxy. They believe they have finally escaped us. Orders, Captain? Her first officer asked. Yuki smiled, the same smile that Lydia had given Krovith 47 years ago. The smile of absolute certainty. We follow them, she said. We always follow them. The UES Persistence and her sister ships entered the wormhole 11 days later, crossing the impossible distance between galaxies in a journey that took 3 years of subjective time. They emerged in an unfamiliar sky, surrounded by stars that no human had ever seen before, and somewhere in that vastness, the last remnants of the Vrakthi Dominion were hiding. The hunt was not over. It would never be over, not until the promise was kept. For 11 years, the Vrakthi survivors believed they had finally escaped. The galaxy they had fled to was empty of intelligent life, filled only with primitive worlds where simple creatures crawled through primordial seas. It was not much, but it was safe, or so they thought. Krovith was ancient now. His scales faded to a dull gray, his once powerful body bent with age. He had lost everything, his title, his empire, his pride, and all he had left was a handful of refugee ships and a few thousand survivors, who still looked to him for guidance. He spent most of his days sitting in his quarters, staring out at the unfamiliar stars and thinking about the choices that had led him to this place. Sometimes he dreamed about Elysium 7. He dreamed about the old human woman who had smiled at him from the floor of that transport ship, blood running down her face, absolutely certain that her people would come for her. He dreamed about her words, which had haunted him for nearly 50 years. You have given us a promise to keep, in his worst nightmares. She was still smiling on the 12th year of their exile. Krovith was woken by alarms blaring throughout his ship. He stumbled to the command deck as fast as his old legs could carry him, and when he arrived, he found his crew staring at their sensors in disbelief. What is it? He demanded. What is happening? His sensor officer turned to face him, and Krovith saw something in the young Vrakthi's eyes that he had never seen before. Not fear exactly, but something deeper, something like the final acceptance of fate. A probe, the officer said. A human probe. It came through the wormhole. Krovith felt his heart stop. That is impossible, he whispered. They could not have found us, not here, not across the distance between galaxies. They found us, the officer replied, simply for a year. They watched the probe drift through their system. It made no hostile moves, carried no weapons, simply observed and transmitted its findings back through the wormhole to whoever was waiting on the other side. Krovith knew what was coming. He had known for 47 years. On the 13th year, the human fleet emerged from the wormhole. There were only 12 ships, a tiny force compared to the armadas Krovith had once commanded. But they were enough. The Vrakthi had no military left, no resources to fight with, no will to continue resisting. Captain Yuki Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Persistence as her fleet spread out through the system, surrounding the Vrakthi refugee ships in a net that could not be escaped. Open a channel, she ordered. When Krovith's face appeared on her screen, she was struck by how old he looked. The powerful warrior who had destroyed Elysium 7 was gone, replaced by a tired ancient who had been running for half a century. Vrakthi vessels, Yuki said. This is Captain Yuki Chun of the United Earth Navy. You have something that belongs to us. Return our dead. Krovith stared at her for a long moment. You're dead? He repeated. After all this time, after everything that has happened, you came all this way for corpses. We came for our people, Yuki replied, living or dead. We came to bring them home. Most of them died decades ago, Krovith said. In the mines, in the labor camps, from age and sickness and despair. There are only a few hundred survivors left. Then return the survivors and the remains of the rest, Yuki said. Everybody you can account for, every record of their deaths, every personal effect that still exists. Give us back our people. Krovith lowered his head. And if we comply, what then? Then this ends, Yuki said. The hunt is over. The transfer took 3 days. The surviving prisoners, mostly children and grandchildren of the original captives, were brought aboard human ships where medical teams waited to care for them. They emerged from the Vrakti transports, blinking in the unfamiliar light, hardly daring to believe that their long nightmare was finally over. Among them was Sarah Chun, Lydia's granddaughter, now an old woman herself with gray hair and deep lines carved into her face by decades of suffering. She walked slowly down the boarding ramp, leaning on her daughter for support. And when her feet touched the deck of a human ship for the first time in 50 years, she began to cry. "Welcome home," a young officer said, taking her hand. "We are so sorry it took us so long." "You came," Sarah whispered. "That is all that matters. You came." The dead were returned as well, 700 coffins containing the remains of everyone the Vrakthi could account for, including Lydia Chun. Her body had been preserved according to human custom by prisoners who had refused to let their leader be forgotten. Yuki stood alone in the cargo bay where her great-great-grandmother's coffin rested, running her fingers over the simple metal surface. "We kept our promise," she said softly, "just like you knew we would when the transfer was complete." Krovith requested a meeting with Captain Chun. He was brought aboard the Persistence under guard. Though no one seriously expected the ancient Vrakthi to cause trouble, he stood before Yuki in the ship's conference room. Two commanders from two species, separated by 50 years of war. "I have a question," Krovith said finally, his voice tired and old. "If you will permit me." Yuki nodded. "Why?" Krovith asked. "Your people, your resources. Generations spent hunting us across the stars. For what? Was it revenge? Was it hatred? Was it simply to prove that you could?" Yuki considered the question for a long moment before answering. "No," she said. "It was not revenge. Revenge ends. But this never would have ended until we got our people back. It was not hatred either. We do not hate you, Krovith. We barely even think about you anymore." "Then why?" "Because we made a promise," Yuki said simply. "When you took our people, we told you that we would come for them. That promise was made by people who knew they might never live to see it kept. By parents who knew they would pass the mission to their children. By generations who knew they would live and die in the shadow of a debt that was not theirs, but that they would pay anyway." She stepped closer to him. "We did not hunt you because we wanted to. We hunted you because we said we would. And humans keep their promises. That is what makes us what we are." Krovith shook his head slowly. "I do not understand your species," he admitted. "I have spent 50 years trying, and I still do not understand. That is why you lost." Yuki replied without malice. "What happens now?" Krovith asked. "Will you destroy what remains of my people?" "No," Yuki said. "You are no longer a threat to anyone. Your empire is gone. Your military is gone. Your ability to harm us is gone. Destroying you would serve no purpose. So we are simply left here exiled forever in this empty galaxy?" "Yes," Yuki confirmed. "You will live out your days in the place you fled to. Perhaps your children will rebuild someday. Perhaps they will find a way to return to the home galaxy. That is not our concern. Our only concern was keeping our promise. And that promise has been kept." She had him escorted back to his ship as the Vrakthi shuttle departed. Krovith looked back at the human fleet one last time. He thought about all the warnings he had ignored, all the chances he had been given to avoid this fate. And he realized that he had understood nothing at all. The human fleet departed that same day. They traveled back through the wormhole, back across the impossible distance between galaxies, back to a civilization that had spent 2 generations waiting for this moment when Captain Yuki-chan returned to Earth. She was greeted as a hero. The survivors of the long captivity were reunited with descendants they had never met. And Lydia-chan was buried with full military honors in a ceremony attended by millions, but Yuki did not attend the celebrations instead. She went to the memorial that had been built for the people of Elysium 750 years ago, a simple wall of names carved into black stone, and she stood there for a long time, reading the names of people she had never known but had spent her entire life fighting for on. Old man approached her, a historian who had been studying the hunt for decades. The Galactic Concord has updated their briefing for new species, he told her. The section on humanity has been revised. What does it say now? Yuki asked. The historian smiled. It no longer says, do not attack the humans. It says, do not make them promise anything. Yuki laughed, a quiet sound that contained 50 years of sorrow and triumph. That is good advice, she said. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the memorial behind her, leaving the hunt behind her, finally free of the promise that had shaped her entire existence across the galaxy. Species who had heard the story of the hunt whispered it to each other in the darkness of space. Stations and the halls of government. Buildings, the story of a civilization that had crossed the universe to keep a promise, that had hunted their enemy for generations without mercy or hesitation, that had proven once and for all that there were some things humans would never let go. And somewhere in a distant galaxy, an old Rakthi stared up at unfamiliar stars and remembered a warning he should have heeded. Do not attack the humans. They will hunt you across galaxies, and they will never, ever stop.